Figure out a time of day that really works for you. It could be 5 minutes in the morning, it could be 5 minutes in the evening, it could be while you're traveling, whatever works really. And in that time, is it possible to slowly cultivate a simple habit? One is to learn to also just sit. Um, I feel when we sit, most of the time, if you realize, your brain and mind starts throwing up a whole bunch of things that needs to be done, things that need to be picked up, somebody who didn't respond, some email which has been hovering around in your inbox for weeks, whatever else. Our mind has this tendency to churn things, right? This is all habits in the way mind works. I feel the first few days, weeks, even if you're able to just learn to sit with the mind, where we don't flow with every thought, but we're able to see how the mind operates. Because the basic premise that Buddha started was to examine for yourself. You don't have to accept it as true. You have to start seeing these habits of the mind. So, one simple habit is saying, can we learn to just sit and watch the mind? The second possibility is, of course, there are multiple meditation methods, but I feel to start with, having some guidance becomes helpful. So, if you connect with any of the teachers to be able to just play something and just be able to hear it, most of us have access to either YouTube or podcasts or some channels which will then be able to bring in some of this wisdom, which can then shift your way of thinking. And you don't even have to do this every day. So let's say Monday I sit for 5 minutes and I've heard a talk. On Tuesday, I can just simply revisit what this talk had shared. Can I mull over it? Because one is when you're hearing a teacher say something, but two is you need to contemplate and say, does this really make sense to me? And I feel that's the critical part. Most of the time we hear something, but simple passive listening is not as helpful as much as if you're able to engage with the content. And engaging with the content is really asking yourself, what did I actually hear? What does it actually mean to me? Does this completely make sense? How do I see this in my own life? So let's say you hear a concept like impermanence, right? It's in some ways a simple enough, easy enough concept to understand. This podcast, for example, started at one point and then it's going to end at another. Impermanent, right? So, or let's say the weather is changing or the light is changing as we speak, impermanence. But how do I bring it in to my daily life? How do I see impermanence in my daily life? Besides wanting to drink my tea when it's at that temperature so that it doesn't cool off. But in terms of, let's say, relationships, let's say an old relationship, which is perhaps with a parent or a child or a sibling, and we are in the middle of a fight and we say things like, you're always like this, and you never treat me correctly, or whatever else, right? The always and the nevers, which spill out of both our mouth as well as playing in our minds all the time, is actually contrary to impermanence. So while we understand the concept of impermanence, to really stop and say, did I bring it into my day today? And if I did, how did I bring it in? And did I bring it in meaningfully? And were there spaces where perhaps I didn't bring it in when I should have? In which case, being also a little honest, but also compassionately enough with oneself so that you're able to say, okay, in that fight, maybe I shouldn't have said all of those things because, there are also spaces where they're trying to change. And maybe I can bring that in tomorrow. And the reason we can have the thought that I'll bring it in tomorrow is again because of impermanence, right? So, in some ways, making sure that a lot of these concepts keep finding their way into our daily life.